Hello everybody, we're going to be moving into Unit 10 this evening, and you can see from the topic list here at the top, we are going to be covering section number 23 in the tutorial document. That's actually where we're going to start, and that covers scaffolding, and scaffolding from the perspective of not having chosen it from the beginning of the project, but doing it kind of like in stream. And then we're also going to jump over to chapter 12 in our book to look at this thing called AngularJS. Another look at Web API, and then we're going to look at a Microsoft tutorial on AngularJS as well. I am going to start by taking us to our tutorial document, where I do already have it open up on my screen. And what I've done is I've scrolled through the table of contents here, and I have it shown here so that you can see kind of the stuff that we've been doing. So the first thing that is, the section 22, which we did last week, which was Web API, that we've already covered. But then I want you to just do a really quick look at what's left. We're going to do the scaffolding chapter really quick, and we should really get through it, and I'm thinking in about 20 minutes or so, judging from my video from last year. But then I want you to look at the two other items that are listed here, that are content items, and one of them being Bootstrap. And Bootstrap, even though that chapter is pretty short, I think we've kind of talked about it enough here in class where most of you have a decent idea of what it is. We don't get into the nitty-gritty of how to work through that framework. Unfortunately, we kind of run out of time for that, but there's excellent tutorials out on the web, and you can use this one here as well. But really, this one talks about it more as an overview as opposed to getting into nitty-gritty. But just in summary, Bootstrap is a CSS framework that works in conjunction with JavaScript to create responsive websites that have, I guess, what I would call pre-configured, nice-looking components to it, so that you're not like spending all your time worrying about layout and fonts and colors and all that stuff. You just simply apply the Bootstrap tags to whatever you're building, and it kind of does the layout for you, and it looks beautiful. The next topic would be unit testing, and unit testing is something that we really don't cover a lot in the web program, although that may change in the future from what I'm hearing from our advisors, because I know there's lots of design houses and application builders that won't release anything without doing unit testing, particularly in a Microsoft framework. What unit testing is just a way to write code that tests your code before you actually release it as an application. So like if you wrote some code to, let's say, process financial data, you might write a unit test that would create a bit of code that would feed data to your code and see if the right results are coming back, rather than actually having to have someone sit there and operate the application to figure out if it's right or wrong. So that's unit testing in a nutshell. The last two items in the table of contents refer to actually deploying a .NET project and putting it out on the web. And that's kind of an exciting thing, and they really only give you two approaches here to work with. One would be to deploy it to the Azure cloud, and as students, you guys do have access to the Azure cloud. However, the trial periods are short, and then the subsequent prices are very expensive. So I usually caution people, if you're going to try the trial version, be ready to do a whole bunch of stuff with it in a short period of time, because it's going to go away, and then you might not get another trial period. Well, I suppose you could always sign up with a different email account or something if you wanted. But the educational trial periods are a little bit longer than the consumer versions. The other approach to deploying an ASP.NET website is what we call self-hosting, or proper Windows hosting, really. And what they're instructing you to do in unit or section 27 there is to basically show you how to turn on the web server software in your system, and then take the application that you've built, compile it, and then deploy it as a web application on your system, so you can look at it locally. The other thing that I'll throw out there as a possibility is, if you guys create some impressive work for your final projects, I'm willing to host that on one of our SharePoint servers here on campus, where we would do essentially what's in Chapter 27 here, but we would actually put it on a real Windows server. Now, why is hosting Windows-based web applications more challenging than Linux? Well, basically because of the way that the applications are built and deployed. It's all about the back-end code and the systems that run them. In order to run anything that you've built on these .NET platforms, you must go onto a Windows server. And unfortunately, we don't have web servers configured to allow for the ease that you would with like Apollo, where you just FTP your files, then go to a web browser and pull them up and they're working. It just does not work that smoothly. In order to be able to host a website, you either need to have a hosting account where you could go in and deploy your application, server that students could access, and then we started looking into the software that did the hosting control panels, and that was actually not free, unlike Linux, where it is free. One of the reasons why we haven't done so. Maybe at some point in the near future we'll convince our dean to invest some money in it, and we can cross our fingers and see if that happens. All right, but for right now we're going to go to section 23 and do the scaffolding thing, so we're going to follow through here. All right, so I think you guys got an idea of what scaffolding is from what we did before, and I don't know if you really latched onto it or not, but the whole point of it is if you are working with data models where you have a database or some sort of data that you've hard-coded or whatnot, like we've been doing, and you want to build the interface components to allow you to do all your basic CRUD interactions. So in other words, the database operations where you're creating things, editing them, deleting them, etc., standard database operations. These tools that you learn about, the scaffolding tools, are the ones that help you build those interfaces automatically based upon the data models that you've created. And it's really a significant shortcut for developers, because in the past we'd have to hand code all these things, and when they came out with this scaffolding thing that ties into MVC, it was really kind of a revelation. All right, so let's go ahead and start doing the tutorial here. I'm going to move this over to screen number 2. I am back to working with Visual Studio 2019 this week, although I thought I had solved my blue screen issues, and frankly, folks, I haven't. So I'm crossing my fingers for stability here this evening. I had one blue screen earlier, rebooted, it seems to be fine. So that's why you see it already up and running. So you should open up your Visual Studio 2 and get ready to work. All right, we're going to go to step 1 in the tutorial, and I'm going to begin by actually closing the solution that I have here and creating a new project. We're going to proceed in the same fashion that we have all along. We're going to build a ASP.NET web application on a .NET framework, backend language C#, Windows, and web. Same setting. All right, they'd like us to call this MVC Scaffolding Demo. I'm going to choose my local file location that I've been using here, which is on my desktop. Not my preferred place to go, but that's where we're going right now. I'm going to go ahead and click Create. We're going to stick with empty framework here. We are going to make sure that we choose folder references for MVC. I'm unchecking the HTTPS for now. And it's when I hit this button that I cross my fingers and hope I don't blue screen. So if I am weird in the video when we come back, you'll understand why, because it's probably because of a blue screen, but let's see what happens. Let's hope it doesn't happen. And that's a giant whew, because it worked. It's not how you want to operate, folks, but that's what I have to deal with today. All right. Let's move on now and go to the next step. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to begin by actually adding in support for the entity framework. So we're going to go to the project node, the root of the project, and then we're going to right click. We're going to choose Manage NuGet Packages. And we are going to go ahead and install the entity framework. Now, it's not installed quite yet, so we're going to come up to the Browse section of this interface and type Entity Framework. And let it bring back all of its results. And I know that we've had a little bit of experience already this semester with being wise and not choosing the newest version. You guys remember what last time we used version 6.3 and it gave us a couple little headaches. So knowing that in advance, even though they're calling it latest stable, we're going to go back to 6.2 because I think that's the one that ended up working fine. So I'm just being preemptive in that and choosing version 6.2. Now again, the entity framework is responsible for giving us the tools that we need to do interactions with data components and our models and our databases. So that's why that's a necessary tool. If you're following along in the tutorial document, I just completed page 210 and 211. They really waste a lot of paper here, don't they? Except it's electronic. And then hopefully you didn't have any errors during the install and everything worked out fine. And the next thing that we're going to do, bottom of page 212 going on to 213, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a class to the models folder. So I'm going to come here to the models folder, choose add, and way at the bottom I'm selecting class. Alright. From here they want us to call it employee, so I'm just following suit with what's in the book. Employee.cs. And then go ahead and choose add. Created a new C# file here for us. And then the next thing they'd like us to do is to go ahead and add the code that you see at the bottom of page 213, which is basically the same thing that we've been doing all along. So this is nothing different, it's the same basic code. So I'm going to copy paste it in, and this is our code. So once again, ID, name, joining date, and age with getters and setters for each. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add database context, which is one of the things that, or tools that we get by virtue of adding the entity framework. So as you copy in the code that's on page 214, you'll probably, if I'm not mistaken, you'll probably end up getting some red underlines, and there they are. And that's nothing to worry about, and that's happening basically because we did not yet include the data model with this file. So if you hover over the underline, and I'm actually scrolling a little bit here just so you see what I'm doing, and it says show potential fixes. Just waiting for it to show up. We do need to make sure that we pull that entity framework into the project, so that's what I'm selecting the top choice. So we're going to say using system data entity, and then that connects us to that entity framework, and the underlines go away. And hopefully you guys are all good, I'm assuming.
Yep, I'm good.
Thank you, Javier. All right. The next instruction, and I'm looking at the very bottom of page 214 here. It says now let's build a solution, and you will see the message when the project is successfully built. And I think there's typos there because it should be a built and not build. So let's go ahead and do that. So what they're referring to here is they're not asking you to run it. What they're actually doing is asking you to come up to the project node, or you can go up to the build menu, either way, and you can just choose build right there. Now, one of my habits is I end up usually choosing rebuild, just in case I've done any work with this before, because that one, flushes everything out of memory and then does the build anyhow. So 9 times out of 10, this is the option that you choose. But for right now, we're going to just go ahead and choose build, and then you're going to see at the bottom in the output window, it's starting to do the work, and apparently the code that it built out just fine, compiled without any problems. And really, the only code that we threw in was this little class here, and then the database context. Now that step to build the code is important before we do the scaffolding, because otherwise the scaffolding won't work exactly right, or typically won't work right. So this is where we add that piece. We're going to go now to the controllers folder, and then we're going to right click, choose add, and then here in the menu, see the item that I've selected, it's new scaffolded item. All right, let's choose that. And you get the secondary interface here. So now we're on to page 217 already. All right. Make sure you choose the option MVC5 controller with views using entity controller. So now I'm hoping, like, as you read these options now, they make a lot more sense to you. They should. But it's recognizing the fact that we have entity framework present, and we do want to generate user interfaces to be able to interact with the data components, and that's what that option does for us. Go ahead and click add, and then from here we have to make a couple of selections. Let's start with the model class, and we're going to choose the one that's attached to our project that we just created. In terms of the context, that's what we'll pull in the database context from that class file that we created. Select those. Now, I'm not going to use the layout page because frankly we just don't have one, but we will let it generate views, and we will let it reference script libraries. So that by having this option selected, by the way, that's going to allow it to actually preload some JavaScript stuff, most notably jQuery, which allows us to do some of our client-side validation. That's the whole point of that, just so you know. We're going to stick with the default name of employees controller and go ahead and choose add. Now this is jumping out and taking a look at the data model that we created in that class file, and looks at the entity framework and database context, and then makes some decisions. You notice right now how it was just installing a number of different packages automatically. So we added stuff to the scripts folder, and then it built out the employee controller file, similar to what we've seen in many of the other examples in this document. Okay, now that we have the file created, just take a moment, and I just want you to kind of like slowly step through this and take a look at what we created here. And if you think about all the work that we did previously in building up the stuff to do the database components and all those interactions, with the approach that we just used, because we added the framework, entity framework, put in the data model, put in the database context, and then did the scaffolding, it pre-built the interactions for just about everything in here to various degrees. So for edit, create, delete, all that stuff is in here. And if you notice how the code is, We didn't create any of this. This is all automatic, and this is what is so powerfully cool about this particular product when you get it working correctly. I don't see any red underlines or anything, so everything seems to be good. All right, and somebody here is asking me to scroll down to 49. Okay. And are you getting the same?
Yeah, I just want to make sure mine isn't wonky.
Yeah, and you know what it's doing here. Notice how it's doing a bind too. So it's data binding to the model is what that's doing. So it's attaching itself to the data in that particular action. All right, so we're just looking at the code just to make sure it's basically the same. And it's a pretty significant amount of code, but it does cover all the CRUD operations and the interactions being written into the data store. All right, so now they'd like us to go ahead and run this. I'm going to hit Save All first. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the Run button. You should bring up Google Chrome here in a second. All right, this will take a moment to build out. Sometimes as this is happening, I often like to watch, visuals. So you see what I just did by mistake? Yeah, I think
You didn't create a home page or an index page?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm not sure if it's actually trying to do it or not, because it seems like I stopped it inside of Visual Studio. I guess we'll find out in a second as soon as I type employees, right? I got the impression that I stopped it by accident because I was just moving the window around. All right, let's try launching it again. I apologize for that. I was just trying to get the browser window over Visual Studio so we could watch it load up, and I, of course, took it a step further. So it is up and running now. I'll append employees. Now what this is going to do is it is going to connect us to the interface, an interface that's really similar to what we've seen, except there's nothing there. Because you know why? We didn't hard code any data in this time, did we? Right? All we did is create the web interface to make it happen. And so we have nothing in there. So there's nothing to show. So let's go ahead and create at least a couple things. And you know, I guess I'll just throw some stuff in here. Not my real age, by the way. Let's go ahead and create another one. Let's put today's date in. And create. Let's go ahead and click on the details for one of these, and we can see how the details come back. We can also go in here and edit. And save, and it sticks. Let's try creating another new one. Let's see if we can actually delete the one that we just added. And we can. So you see how beautifully simple that is without really having done a lot of work. You can very quickly add the entity framework, build a model by just declaring data types in a file, add the database context, do some scaffolding, it builds an interface for you, and of course you can come in here and CSS the heck out of it and make it look like whatever you want. No big deal. All the different screens can be CSS, but you see that it's working. Right, so like without a significant amount of effort, we've built a database application. And that's no small thing, folks. It's really quite powerful. All right, let's take a look at where we're at in the document. And they basically kind of step you through a lot of the same things that we were just doing. But it's not a bad idea to actually come in here and start looking at, did the data get into the database? Obviously, we know it did because we're interacting with it. But you can come up here and you can look at the, under the View menu, the SQL Server Object Explorer. It'll take a second to load up. And then if you go to your local database here and expand, you will see that there's the scaffolding demo right here. And if you wanted, you can expand that, go to the tables. There's our employee table. We can right click and we can view data, and then we can see the stuff that we've entered on the front end. Even though the application's running, yes, you can actually look at the stuff while it's running, which is kind of powerful. So we do know that the things that we've been doing and the edits that we were making were working, and this actually creates a successful assignment. So let's hit the stop button on the video here and call it a day on section 23.